£750,000. Then, the sack. The BBC decision that could haunt the license fee, the BBC's £750,000 mistake. How its highest-paid presenter ended up out. The BBC paid Scott Mills as much as £749,999 in a single year, making him the corporation's highest-paid on-air personality. Then, it dismissed him. The extraordinary sequence is revealed in the BBC's latest annual pay disclosures, which show that Mills received between £745,000 and £749,999 during the financial year ending in March 2026. His previous published salary had been between £355,000 and £359,999, meaning his remuneration more than doubled after he took control of the Radio 2 breakfast show. It is difficult to imagine a clearer illustration of the BBC's confused approach to money, management, and accountability. At a time when the broadcaster is warning that its funding model is unsustainable, preparing major job cuts, and demanding a renewed settlement from the public, it has revealed that its most highly rewarded presenter was dismissed immediately after the financial year ended. The central question is no longer merely whether Scott Mills was worth £750,000. It is how the BBC could commit such a large sum of license fee-backed money to someone whose contract it would terminate only months later, and whether senior executives properly understood the risks surrounding one of their most prominent employees. Scott Mills's salary more than doubled. Mills had earned between £355,000 and £359,999 in the previous reporting year. His elevation to the Radio 2 breakfast show in January 2025 transformed his position within the BBC, and apparently his pay packet. For 2025 to 26, his reported earnings rose to between £745,000 and £749,999. Taking the middle points of the two published bands, that represents an increase of approximately £390,000, or around 109%. Mills therefore moved from joint 11th place in the BBC's previous talent pay rankings to first place. Gary Lineker, who had previously dominated the list on approximately £1.35 million, left his regular match of the day role during the reporting period. Zoe Ball had also stepped away from the Radio 2 breakfast show, creating the vacancy Mills inherited. The BBC can argue that Mills was not simply given an unexplained pay rise. He took on one of the corporation's most important broadcasting positions, replacing Ball on a national breakfast program with millions of listeners. But that defense only goes so far. A public service broadcaster facing relentless financial pressure should be expected to demonstrate why a radio presenter required remuneration approaching £750,000. It should also be able to show that sufficiently rigorous due diligence had been completed before such a substantial commitment was made. The eventual dismissal makes that requirement even more important. Why the BBC dismissed Mills. Mills was removed from the BBC in March 2026 amid concerns relating to his personal conduct and renewed scrutiny of an historic police investigation. The Metropolitan Police confirmed that Mills had been questioned under caution in 2018 during an investigation into allegations of serious sexual offenses involving a teenage boy under the age of 16. The alleged incidents were said to have occurred between 1997 and 2000. The investigation was closed in 2019 after the Crown Prosecution Service concluded there was insufficient evidence to bring charges. Mills was not prosecuted. That distinction is essential. Allegations are not convictions, and the closure of the criminal investigation without charges must not be ignored. Mills later said he had cooperated fully with the authorities and referred to the rumors and speculation that followed his departure. The BBC, nevertheless, terminated his contract after receiving what it described as new information. It subsequently acknowledged that it had known about the police investigation since 2017, although it said the later information changed its understanding of the case. The corporation also apologized for failing to investigate properly when separate concerns were reportedly raised with it in 2025. This is where the BBC's position becomes much more difficult. The institution knew Mills had been connected to a police investigation years before appointing him to the Radio 2 breakfast show. It then awarded him a salary approaching £750,000. Only afterwards did it conclude that the circumstances justified immediate dismissal. Either the BBC did not possess crucial information when it awarded Mills its most prestigious radio position, or it possessed enough information to warrant much more detailed examination but failed to act adequately. Neither possibility reflects well on its management. Did license fee payers receive value for money? The strongest argument in Mills's favor is his audience performance. By the final quarter of 2025, his Radio 2 breakfast show was attracting approximately 6.46 million weekly listeners, an increase of around 5%, and his best result since taking over. Those are substantial numbers. At the midpoint of his salary band, Mills cost roughly 11.6 pence per weekly listener across the year, although such a simplified calculation does not account for production expenditure, frequency of listening, or the wider value generated for Radio 2. His show was therefore not an obvious audience failure. The problem is that value for money cannot be assessed solely by counting listeners. A senior presenter's value must also include reliability, reputational risk, contractual stability, and the likelihood that the broadcaster will retain the person long enough to justify the investment. On that broader measure, the arrangement ended disastrously. The BBC paid Mills at an unprecedented level, positioned him as the voice of its flagship popular radio breakfast program, and then removed him after little more than a year in the role. Even where the dismissal was justified by newly obtained information, the outcome suggests that the BBC's earlier appointment and vetting processes did not protect the corporation, or the public financing it receives, from a foreseeable reputational and operational shock. Who are the BBC's remaining highest-paid presenters? With Mills gone, Radio 1 breakfast presenter Greg James is the highest-paid personality still working regularly for the corporation. He received between £440,000 and £440,000 up from £425,000 to £429,999. Stephen Nolan earned between £425,000 and £429,999. Vernon Kay and Laura Quensberg each received between £405,000 and £409,999, while Alan Shearer was paid between £390,000 and £394,999. The full disclosure still does not provide a complete picture of celebrity pay at the BBC. The published list generally covers talent paid directly from the license fee-funded public service operation. Personalities whose programs are supplied through independent production companies or who are paid through BBC studios may not appear, even when they are prominent BBC faces. That limitation weakens the corporation's repeated claims of transparency. The public receives a partial list, not a complete account of what every major presenter ultimately costs. The BBC says it is in real jeopardy. The salary revelations arrive at a particularly damaging moment. The BBC has warned that its existing funding model is unsustainable as it prepares for negotiations over the arrangement that will replace the current settlement after 2027. The number of paid television licenses reportedly fell by 539,000 over the latest year. The corporation is also planning up to 2,000 job losses and targeting approximately £500 million in savings. A colour television license now costs £180 a year. At that price, funding Mills's maximum reported salary required the equivalent of more than 4,166 full-price television licenses. That calculation does not mean those specific households' payments were transferred directly to him, but it illustrates the scale of remuneration involved and why the BBC cannot dismiss public scrutiny as hostility toward successful broadcasters. Households are threatened with enforcement if they watch live television without the required license. Meanwhile, the corporation can more than double a presenter's disclosed earnings, make him its highest-paid star, and then terminate his contract at the end of the same financial year. The contrast is politically explosive. The license fee argument is becoming harder to defend. The BBC's defenders will point out that it competes with commercial radio networks, streaming companies, production businesses, and global media platforms. Talented presenters can leave, and maintaining popular programs requires competitive salaries. That argument has some merit. But the BBC is not an ordinary commercial company. Its primary funding mechanism is compulsory for households that watch live television or use BBC iPlayer. License fee income accounted for roughly 65% of total BBC income in 2024 to 25. Compulsory funding demands a higher standard of prudence than voluntary subscription revenue. Netflix customers can cancel Netflix. Spotify subscribers can leave Spotify. Newspaper readers can stop buying a particular newspaper. The BBC's license fee operates through law, enforcement letters, and potential criminal proceedings. That arrangement can only remain politically defensible if the public believes the institution spends the money carefully. Paying nearly £750,000 to a presenter who is then abruptly dismissed severely undermines that belief. This is a management failure, not just a salary story. The most important revelation is not that Scott Mills earned a great deal of money, nor should the story be reduced to the unproven allegations that surrounded his departure. Mills was not charged, and any responsible assessment must preserve that fact. The deeper issue is institutional competence. The BBC knew about an earlier investigation. It later admitted that concerns raised in 2025 were not handled properly. It appointed Mills to one of its biggest programs, more than doubled his published remuneration, and then removed him after receiving additional information. That sequence raises legitimate questions about who authorized the appointment, what checks were performed, what information was reviewed, and whether executives adequately protected license fee payers. The BBC is simultaneously pleading financial vulnerability, cutting jobs, and distributing enormous payments at the top of the organization. It cannot demand more money from the public while treating scrutiny of that spending as an inconvenience. The Scott Mills salary disclosure gives license fee critics a devastatingly simple argument. The BBC made a presenter its highest paid star and then decided it could no longer employ him. Until the corporation can explain how that happened, its claims of financial discipline will remain extremely difficult to take seriously. Search engine optimization title. The BBC made Scott Mills its highest paid presenter, then sacked him. Search engine optimization description. Scott Mills earned almost £750,000 as the BBC's highest paid presenter before being dismissed. We examine his salary, the BBC's decisions, and what it means for the license fee. URL slug. BBC. Scott, MILLS. Highest paid presenter. Sacked. Spotify SEO Max description. Scott Mills became the BBC's highest paid presenter on almost £750,000 before the corporation abruptly terminated his contract. This tailored investigation examines how his salary more than doubled, what the BBC knew before appointing him to Radio 2 Breakfast, whether license fee payers received value for money, the highly paid personalities who remain, and why the revelation could intensify demands to reform or abolish the television license fee.